I was halfway through my mashed potatoes when Aunt Claire laughed and said, "Some girls just don't turn out how we hoped." Everyone at the table chuckled, except me. I knew exactly who that line was aimed at. I kept my face still, eyes down, like I didn't care, but inside, I was boiling. Before I tell you what happened next, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the bell icon, because what went down that night? You won't believe it. Have you ever been insulted by your own family? Like they forgot you're human? My name is Jessa. I was the girl no one bet on. At least not in this family. Every Thanksgiving was the same. Rachel, my cousin, got praised for her law school. My brother Noah got celebrated for just existing. And me? I was the art school dropout. The one who still hasn't figured things out. They didn't know what I did now, and I never told them. Why would I? I liked watching them underestimate me. That night, they didn't even wait for dessert to start taking shots. Uncle Brad raised his glass and said, "To future lawyers, CEOs, and maybe even Etsy artists." Everyone laughed again. Mom didn't say a word in my defense. She just sipped her wine like she agreed. I smiled, but my hand gripped the fork so tight I thought it might snap. Then Dad dropped the bomb. "By the way," he said, "Mr. Darnell might drop by later. He's in the area. He said he wanted to talk business." The table fell silent. Mr. Darnell wasn't just his boss. He was the regional director of the entire company. Basically, Dad's career was tied to his mood. Rachel immediately fixed her hair. Noah sat up straighter. Everyone suddenly cared about appearances. I stayed quiet. I already knew how this night was going to end. Or at least, I thought I did. But when the doorbell rang and Mr. Darnell walked in, something happened that none of them were prepared for. He looked around the room, smiled politely, and then his eyes landed on me. His whole face changed. He walked straight toward me, extended his hand, and said, "Good evening, ma'am. I had no idea you'd be here tonight." And just like that, their laughter died. The silence after he said that was so thick, you could hear a fork drop. Dad looked like he'd swallowed a brick. Mom blinked twice, like she wasn't sure she heard right. Rachel's lips parted, confused, and Noah looked at me like I'd just pulled off some kind of magic trick. But I didn't say anything. I just stood up slowly, shook Mr. Darnell's hand, and gave him a small, controlled smile. He turned to the rest of them and said, "I didn't know this was your family, Jessa. You never talk much about them at work." At work. That word echoed in the room like thunder. Dad opened his mouth to speak, but Mr. Darnell kept going. "She's one of the sharpest consultants I've ever worked with. When your department was struggling last quarter, guess who helped us bounce back?" Then he looked directly at my father and added, "You work under the system. She helped rebuild." My father's face turned pale. Rachel looked like she might actually choke on her pride. I just stayed quiet and sat back down. Mr. Darnell sat next to me. Not Dad, not Mom. Me. I caught Aunt Claire watching me, her fake smile gone, replaced with something bitter. I wanted to ask her, "Not quite the disappointment you thought I was, huh?" But I didn't. I didn't need to. The look on their faces was enough. You know what was wild? Even then, they didn't ask me a single question. Not one, "How did this happen?" or "When did you start working with him?" They just sat there pretending they weren't scrambling to process what they'd just seen. But the truth? This wasn't the first time they'd ignored what I was becoming. It was just the first time they couldn't look away. So tell me, if your own family made you feel invisible for years, would one dinner be enough to forgive them? After dinner, everyone scattered awkwardly. Dad offered Mr. Darnell a drink, but he declined politely, said he had another stop to make, then turned to me and said, "Let's catch up Monday. I want to run that new proposal by you before the board sees it." I nodded, and as he walked out, The door barely closed before the questions exploded. But not the kind you'd expect. Mom didn't ask about my job. She said, "You could have at least told us you worked with him. We looked like fools." Dad muttered, "You should have warned me. I wouldn't have said half the things I did tonight." Aunt Claire, in her usual syrupy tone, added, "You've always been a quiet girl. Guess we just didn't know you. We're important now. Not congrats. Not we're proud of you. Just blame. Just damage control." That's when I finally stood up and said, "You didn't know, because you never cared to ask. You all decided who I was a long time ago. I just stopped trying to correct you." No one spoke. Even Rachel was quiet. Her confidence was gone, replaced with something I recognized, fear masked as confusion. I walked out to the porch to get some air, my heart pounding, not from anger anymore, but from clarity. For years I kept hoping they'd see me, that maybe one day I'd say something and they'd listen. But tonight proved something deeper. They saw me now, and still didn't want to understand. That should have been the end of it. Me walking away from that table with my head held high. But life doesn't work like that, does it? Because when I got home later that night, there was an envelope taped to my door. No name. Just my address, scribbled in messy handwriting. I opened it with shaking hands, thinking maybe it was from a client. But it wasn't. Inside was a torn photograph of my parents. And behind it, in thick red ink, it said, "They're hiding more than you think." My hands went cold as I stared at that photo. It was old, faded edges, probably from the early 90s. My mom looked younger, smiling in a way I hadn't seen in years. But it wasn't the photo that shook me. It was what was written beneath it, in barely legible handwriting. "Ask them about the adoption." Adoption? I sat down on my couch, the room spinning. I tried to think. Had anyone ever hinted at something like that? Any weird moments growing up? Any papers I wasn't allowed to see? I remembered how they'd always dodge questions about my birth story, how my baby pictures started later than my siblings, how there were no stories about Mom being pregnant with me. Was it possible? I grabbed my laptop and started searching public records, old hospital data, birth announcements, anything. But something weird happened. My birth certificate was there. But it had been updated 10 years after my birth. That didn't make sense. The address listed wasn't even ours. It was a shelter. My chest tightened. The next morning, I drove back to the house. I wasn't planning to go in. I just sat in my car across the street, watching. I needed to see them one more time, through a different lens. And then, I saw him. A man I'd never seen before walked up to our front porch and knocked. "Dad?" answered. They spoke briefly, and then Dad handed him a thick envelope. The man looked around nervously, stuffed it inside his jacket, and left in a black SUV with no plates. I followed him. He didn't go far, just across town to a rundown law office near the edge of the city. I waited outside until he left, then walked in pretending to be a client. The receptionist looked annoyed, but before she could say anything, I caught sight of a file sitting on her desk. It had my name on it. I smiled politely, distracted her with a fake story about needing legal help for a business dispute, then left. But not before snapping a picture of that file with my phone. That night, I zoomed in on the photo, and my heart dropped. There was a line highlighted in yellow, "Sealed by request of adoptive parents. Biological family rights terminated under emergency status." I wasn't just adopted. Someone made sure no one would ever find out. But the bigger question wasn't if I was adopted. It was, why did they hide it so hard? And who were they trying to protect me from? I didn't sleep that night. Every memory from childhood came flooding back, but this time with questions. Why did Mom always get stiff when I asked about baby stories? Why did Dad avoid school meetings even when I begged? Why did I always feel separate, like I didn't belong no matter how hard I tried? The next day, I walked straight into the house without knocking. Mom and Dad were in the kitchen. When they saw me, they froze. I tossed the printed photo of the adoption record on the table and said, "You lied to me, my whole life." Mom sat down slowly. Dad didn't speak. "I want the truth. No more games." And finally, they gave it. I wasn't their biological daughter. My real mother, Emily, was a teenage runaway. She'd given birth in a shelter after escaping an abusive home. Mom and Dad were volunteers there, already struggling with infertility. When they met me, I was 4 months old and abandoned by Emily, who never returned. But here's the twist. Emily did return. 3 years later. She was clean, working, and wanted me back. But Dad, terrified I'd be taken, used a private lawyer to seal the file and paid to make sure no court ever reopened it. "We were scared," Mom whispered. "You were finally ours. We couldn't lose you." I stood there, heart shattered, not because they weren't my real parents, but because they stole my choice. They raised me with control, not love. And when I didn't turn out how they wanted, they rejected me emotionally, while still keeping their secret locked away like a shameful box in the attic. I walked out without another word. Weeks passed. I hired a private investigator. After some digging, we found Emily. She was living 2 states away, married, running a small community art center. I met her, nervously, cautiously, and when she saw me, she broke down crying. She'd never stopped thinking about me. Never stopped. Wondering if I was safe. She showed me a drawer full of sketches, me, drawn over the years based on memory alone. That day, something healed in me. Not because I suddenly had answers, but because I finally felt seen, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't trying to prove anything to anyone. Moral: sometimes the family you're born into doesn't see your worth, but that doesn't mean you don't have any. Truth has a way of finding you, and when it doesn't just expose lies, it sets you free. Have you ever felt like an outsider in your own family? Tell me in the comments below. If this story gave you chills or made you think, make sure to like, share, and subscribe.